very warm welcome to Moneycontrol. I'm Shweta Punj. The last few months have seen a flurry of tax notices being sent out to businesses and individuals. Just for online gaming platforms and casinos, they have received show cause notices to reclaim over ₹1 trillion of in GST. And that's not it. We are seeing a flurry of notices being sent out to gaming companies, to small traders, small businesses, and individuals. This was a tax that was touted to make life easier. It was touted as a tax reform to enable ease of doing business. Tax notices are being dated back to 2018, 2019, and so on. So, what has happened in 2023 that the Revenue Department is churning out these tax notices? Where have the traders gone wrong in interpreting or reading into the GST law? I have with me three experts who will help us understand what's really happening with these tax notices. What are these notices about? What are the solutions? Please welcome Mr. Kulraj Ashwani, Principal Durva Advisors, Mr. Sudipto Bhattacharjee, Specialist in GST, Customs, and several other indirect taxes, a partner at Khaitan and Company, and Mr. Jasmeet Singh, Advocate on Record, Supreme Court of India. We were just having a chat, before we went live. I just want to get a sense from the three of you on, how bad is the situation on ground. We are getting strands of information from the government's revenue department that notices worth over 1 lakh crore have been sent out only to the online gaming sector. But there is clearly more to it. Why don't we start with you, Kulraj?
Yeah, hi, Shweta. Shweta, that's the correct point. There's a lot more to the entire situation than only the online gaming. If you see the news reported, there are almost 65,000 notices that have been issued only in September month. So it's a lot more. And there have been several factors towards it. The major factor is that till date, there was no assessment audit that never happened over the past 5 years. We saw a lot of assessments audit happening in 22-23, and therefore the notices were issued. More particularly, September of 2023 saw a due date for issuing show cause notices for a period of 17-18. So law had a limitation period to issue show cause notices, and therefore department acted abruptly in issuing the show cause notices wide across to taxpayers on issues that were sometimes genuine, that were sometimes not so genuine. So the flurry has been because of the fact that almost 6 years taxpayers have not really seen anything, and the due dates were happening. And more or less, there were several issues that have not got picked up, be it online gaming, be it secondment of employees, be it reconciliation challenges that are happening. So a lot of these have culminated. Given that due dates were approaching, the authorities had no point but to issue these notices, and they have done so. But yes, the quantums and the magnitude is significant.
Right. Sudipta, what's your sense? So, one, there was a deadline that the department is working with right now, but also, was there some ambiguity with the GST law?
I think that there have been several ambiguities in GST law. I mean, if we look at it, but too many to enumerate. And see, I would not sort of overstate that point. There has been a lot of representations that have been filed to the government to clarify. Some of the aspects have been clarified. Many remain to be clarified. Some of the clarifications that have gotten issued, ironically, by the government has led to more ambiguities. So I think that is one part of it. The second and third buckets, I'll talk about, Kulraj touched upon the reconciliation issues. I think that's a massive bucket of the notices that have come in, where, to give a very simple illustration, if I as a taxpayer say that I have received services of 100 from X, and as per X's return, he has said only 50 has been supplied, that's a typical example of a reconciliation issue, and that can happen because of a multitude of factors. Unfortunately, the first conclusion that the GST authorities are jumping on is that there is an evasion or worse. So I think that is one major chunk. Second is industry specific things that are cropping up. Kulraj also talked about the secondment of manpower, which has resulted from a 2021 judgment of the Supreme Court, which effectively overturns a very settled position of law, vis-a-vis secondment of people of expatriate employees into Indian entities from their overseas holding companies or subsidiary companies, as the case may be. Now, that is another issue where I think to the last count, at least 1,000 notices have been issued, and only in October, in the first fortnight of October, 1,000 notices have come in. Quite a few notices had been issued earlier also. A lot of people have paid up. Now, this is symptomatic of the disease, because this is a case where if I pay the GST on the so-called import of service of secondment, the entire amount is available to me as a credit. So this is a revenue neutral thing. There was no reason for the revenue to collect or demand tax retrospectively on all of these from all of these companies. But that's precisely what is happening. Then there are sector. I mean, online gaming, of course, is a large sort of bucket that all of us know about, all of us talk about. I'm representing several of them, and the numbers there are just absurd. Without going into the merits of it, I mean, these are companies which have turnovers of 80 crores, 200 crores, 100 crores, and notices worth 9,000 crores, 50,000 crores, 10,000 crores. That's the kind of demands that are being sent to these guys. So I think overall, somewhere the filter of application of mind, independent decision making in our executive, that really seems to be missing.
Right. Mr. Singh, I want to get your thoughts in. You're at the Supreme Court. A lot of relief that's actually coming, or whatever little relief that's coming, it's coming from the courts. It's not coming from department or the appellate tribunals that have been set up for this.
Yeah. There are two reasons for it. First, the Supreme Court or the High Court, when they exercise their writ jurisdiction, they have to see whether these notices are absolutely absurd or not. Because otherwise, if they are not completely absurd and on the face of it a 50-50 notice, then they have to go into merit through the adjudicating process, which is prescribed under the GST Act. And it may take few years to reach the conclusion or culmination of that litigation. So when High Court and Supreme Court sees an absolutely absurd notice, they generally exercise their writ jurisdiction and give relief. So that's why, a lot of limelight are coming into picture, and a lot of thought is going into this, that only courts are giving relief. Another aspect to it is that a lot of these notices have been issued by computers. I mean, generally there is no application of mind per se into it. There are some data, I don't know what server they are working on, but there are some data which they fix in. They say that, if your turnover is this and you have not given this much GST, automatically they'll issue a notice. I mean, I know a few clients of mine have come up with notices in which they say the reasons for issuing notice A, B, C, D, and there's not even a tick on A, B, or C, or D. So I really don't know under what provision of law or under what reason this notice has been issued. So it's mostly a tech issued notice, no application of mind, and hence the High Courts and Supreme Courts have been interfering.
In fact, Shweta, that's a very important point. Sorry to interject. I'm saying that's a very important point Jasmeet made. I have been in courts where the judges have come down very heavily on such computer-generated notices, and the point again and again that is made by courts is whether it's artificial intelligence or any other form of technology that's supposed to aid the process, that's supposed to aid the workload of the tax authorities, not supplant them, not take over that entire executive function. I mean, there has to be, think of the imagine the amount of non-application of mind when you are not even ticking in a standard format document.
A tax notice needs to be signed, right, by an officer who's gone through it. So these AI generated notices, do they carry the signature that seals something?
Digital signatures
of the officer of that particular
yes.
So the officer's signature is there, but it's an AI generated notice, and it does not make any.
Please understand, we have about 20 or 1,000 GST officers, and we have about 1.2 crores GST filings. So for them to manually see all of them is also impossible. So let's be fair on the officers as well. So it's the infrastructure, it's the system which needs complete overhaul to change the dynamics or to change or to improve the situation. Right. We can't just blame it on the department completely.
Fair enough. So, what are the kind of notices that have been sent out? is it like some of the notices that one has come across or has read about is either claiming a fake input tax credit, or there's been a mismatch between input tax credit and how much you were supposed to get. Fake invoicing has been one of the things. So can you just take me through, what are the kind of notices that have been sent out, and what are the concerns that these notices have highlighted?
Sure. One typical set of notice, as we've been talking, is the reconciliation. That's prominently everywhere in all kind of notices are there, and that I would attribute it to be an infrastructure failure only, because when the GST got introduced, you never had that matching mechanism and stuff, and now the government is trying to implement that matching mechanism right from retrospective effect and raising those tax demands.
So can you explain reconciliation?
Yeah.
What is this?
So
Is there a
Sudipto,
fundamental mistake? Yeah.
there's no fundamental mistake. Please understand. Initially, so I'll just give you an example, and what Sudipto mentioned, I go to a restaurant and I order a food. I take those services, and let's say for a moment I take a credit on that. Now, when I take a credit, and let's say that restaurant did not file the return, or if they filed the return, they did not put my GST number on it, or they put an incorrect GST number on that. In all such cases, my portal will not reflect that I have availed services of such vendor. And therefore, the department says either you have not taken the services or the vendor has not paid the tax. Now, in all such cases, an SSE has to prove its bona fide to say that, no, I have taken that service, I have given you this invoice. Let's say I have made the payment, so I'll give the payment details and stuff. So I'm giving you a very simplistic example. There could be several layers of complications to it. But department doesn't really accept to it. Now, given that there were quite a number of these transactions, CBIC came up with a circular saying that if you have such reconciliation issues, which is rightly there, you get a certificate from the vendor. Now, while legally CBIC had done what it could be, but practically at a ground level, a vendor whom I have taken services may not be a vendor currently. So how would I chase them to get a certificate? So in all such cases, show cause note demand. So show cause notice is directly never issued. So there's a culmination of event before issuing a show cause notice. There are proceedings to it. In all such cases, the authorities do not really give cognizance of all these factors. They create a tax demands. It's very typical of it. What an SSC can do in such cases? I have taken goods or I have taken services. I can give evidence to that effect. But the officer wants something on happening on GST portal, which is not in my hands. I'm not even in touch with the vendor. How would I go back to the vendor and take a certificate? So in all such cases, SSC has no option but to go to the High Court. But again, how much SSC can opt to take that remedy up there is again a question. So that's typically one such issue. Secondly, there are issues with I have taken services of a vendor and vendor has the registration of vendor got cancelled for any given reason. My credit is disallowed, even though at the point when I'm taking services or goods, they were genuine credits. Third, I would believe that there are issues regarding genuine interpretation on transactions. Specifically, when I do some transaction with my employees, I've seen that a lot of people notices have those tax demand where I supply food or let's say transportation services to my employees and the department seeks a recovery of tax demands on it. While there are several advanced rulings saying that there are no tax recoveries or the tax recoveries only to the extent of the value that I recovered. But yes, you have been seeing that, as Sudipto mentioned, that in certain cases, the clarification only culminated to tax demand. That's true. That's happening. So the issues are varied and a lot more factual. But yes, these issues are hurting, and there are so many of them actually.
So
I'll add one
considering
thing.
yes,
Sorry.
please.
So I just wanted to add one more thing is, if you are a service provider, if you're an SSE who is in the services sector, you are effectively in 29 jurisdictions across the country. You have that, assuming you have a pan-India operation, you will have that many GST registrations. So you are exposed to notices on the same issue 29 times over, because the various state authorities can reach out vis-a-vis that jurisdiction. At times, for the same registration, both state as well as central GST authorities in that state are reaching out to the SSEs, and then it is on the SSE to go and tell them that you cannot do parallel proceedings, and at times for that also you have to go to High Court. So that's also leading to multiplicity of notices.
So this is obviously adding up to the legislative burden, because these are kind of cases that should not ideally go up to High Court, and the tax administration should have mechanisms to address those issues. Mr. Singh, if you could come in here on the kind of burden that this is placing, and also the kind of timelines that we're looking at. Because if everyone's going to go to one of the courts, what does it mean, or what does it translate into in terms of costs and in terms of time taken to really get relief?
You're absolutely right. See, as a litigating lawyer, my motto would always be long live litigation. But generally, for an assessee, imagine a situation, where I'll give you example which, on the face of it, to you and to your viewers, would sound absolutely absurd. Imagine a situation where, in an assessment year, you win a particular case against the department. Say, for instance, a particular class of service, I win it before the court of law, and it is said that on that particular class of service, GST will not be imposed. Can you imagine a situation on the next year? Again, I get a notice from the department to say that previous year was a separate financial year, separate assessment year. Hence, for this year, again, we are issuing notice asking you to pay GST. So my defense is not that, last year the courts have already held that on this GST is not applicable. I have to again fight it out. I have to again go to court and say that, last year there was this issue which has already taken, judicial determination that GST is not applicable. So you decide it again. That sort of litigation comes up to high courts and Supreme Courts. For the same transaction, for the same cause of action, for the same point of law, we have separate litigation for separate assessment years. Imagine the workload on judiciary.
No, so then
absurd.
It is absurd, and this is a new thing that's happening this year, or has this been a recurring theme?
See, I'll tell you, the prima facie, on the face of it, to me, there are two reasons because of this absurdity. First reason is, these I'm told informally by the when I speak to people and when I discuss these things with the department guys, they have some sort of internal targets to reach in terms of issuance of demand. So every officer is not interested in successful recovery. His job is done or his targets are met as soon as he raises a demand. So he doesn't care whether it is an absurd demand or a legal demand. He doesn't care whether this demand survives the test of judiciary or legality or the provision of law. All he cares is it should be raised. Second, once an absurd demand is raised, nobody wants to take it on their head to withdraw it. Imagine on the face of it, if the officer sees that yes, this notice looks absurd and his predecessor has done something completely non-application of mind, he would still not withdraw it. Why? Because people would then question his integrity, or department would start questioning his integrity, because of which nobody wants to close an absolutely absurd file as well, which leads to, everyone says that go to court, get your relief. We don't care. We cannot do anything. Imagine this situation.
But even the courts, like, it costs money, it costs time, and very often courts are also pro-revenue.
See, again, I wouldn't say, it's a very general remark to make, and I don't think it'll be a fair remark to make on the judiciary that they are pro-revenue. I would say that mostly they are fair, and when they see these absurd notices, they come heavily on the revenue. So I don't kind of agree with this sort of.
There are instances when the notice is absurd, and they just might direct the person who's appealing that why don't you go back and get this addressed in the right way, and go back to the appellate or the authority.
It is not a pro-revenue approach. It is generally a judiciary systematic approach. See, imagine if there are say 20,000 notices every day issued in Delhi alone. All 20,000 people approach the Delhi High Court for writ jurisdiction. There are 50 judges. What
fair
about
enough.
other matters? What are other bails? So they can't go into all notices, and they can't take care of all the GST notices on their own. On which they say there is
Yeah, that's a very fair point. So now, I want to ask all of you, what is the advice that you're giving to your clients? What are the options for people and businesses who've been slapped with these notices? Because we do not still have a GST appellate tribunal that's functional. There are no people in the tribunals to hear cases. So what does one do if one has got a notice? Kulraj.
Yeah. So there are two options available to a taxpayer at this stage. One is that litigate in the normal route, which is so tribunal is something that is a third level of litigation. First, if you get your notice adjudicated, then if you fail at that stage, then there is an appellate forum, and if fail at appellate forum, then there's a tribunal forum available. So that's some steps ahead. But immediately, if you have a notice which is legally right, then you may like to challenge it up at the commissioner appeals levels until the commissioner appeals level, and may get it adjudicated at this stage. But if the show cause notice is absolutely absurd, the numbers they're talking are crazy, and the taxpayers have the ability, then High Court is one route that you can get. But there's always an uncertainty whether how High Court will approach it with all fairness, will admit it, or may just send it back saying that you have an alternate remedy available and why are you not opting for that. So that's always a risk that's there. But yes, if the show cause notice is absolutely absurd, then that's a possible ground. But in all other cases where the show cause notice has tried to address things, but there are issues which are beyond, like say, a reconciliation issue, or let's say an employee recovery issue, which that the transactions are there, then the High Court may not entertain, and taxpayers would need to fight that out the legal battle. So those are the perspectives that a taxpayer would need to keep in mind before deciding upon the right route, whether the issue has merits to be taken up the High Court level. If not, then the routine litigation level has to be followed.
So then, Sudipto, what are the timelines that we're looking at? And is this the advice you're giving to your clients that approach the courts, or what is the strategy that you're advising them with?
So see, the moment one receives a notice, like Kulraj said, we apply the first filter, that is it absurd on the face of it? That is one check. Second is the issuing authority, and this is a bit of a technical point, but a very critical one in terms of legal strategy, is the show cause notice has to be issued by the proper officer as defined in law. So is it the proper officer? Like if it's an investigating authority like DGGI, which has issued, Director General of GST Intelligence, if they have issued, there is a line of argument possible that it can only be issued by a jurisdictional authority, GST authority, and not by the investigating authority. Or is the show cause notice based on independent application of mind, or is it just a copy paste from an audit observation or a investigation report? Another thing that we often see now that a lot of audits are happening, the GST law and the audit manual, etc., they prescribe a certain amount of time gap between the audit findings, giving the assessee a time to respond to those, react to those audit findings, followed by a show cause notice. A lot of times that timeline is completely being ignored or crunched, absolutely, giving no fair chance to the assessee to sort of react, digest that information, and respond. So that's another set of grounds on the point of natural justice, that I have not been given a fair hearing, fair opportunity to digest all the information, etc. So those are some of the immediate grounds that one needs to see when a notice comes in. But if you and the fourth one, of course, is challenging constitutional validity of a provision. And one ready example, since we have spoken about online gaming a fair amount, that the very provision under which the valuation mechanism is being done, Rule 31A3 of the CGST rules, that's constitutional validity is suspect, highly suspect. And currently about 5 high courts are sort of cognizant. They are hearing matters challenging constitutional validity of that. Now, the moment you have that sort of a provision being invoked against you, it becomes a ready case for trying to approach a high court. So I think that's one layer of strategy. Second, of course, is the usual thing where we file a reply. At the first level of appeal to the commissioner appeal, there is a pre-deposit, and this is where I think the second or the nuance comes in, is because the moment you go for the mainstream litigation, one of the elements of cost is that very high pre-deposits under GST. Earlier, it used to be capped at 10 crores, but now for given the kind of large demands, the cap effectively now is 100 crores. So you may be out of 100 crores by the time, or even more.
That's
by the time
ridiculous.
you reach
As in, the gaming companies don't even have revenues, to maybe take care of a fraction of that cost. So what do you
Absolutely.
do? Mr.
I mean,
Singh,
this is in fact a
what is
specific
one?
answer we gave. I mean,
Yeah.
in one of the matters that I'm doing in High Court, they said that, why don't you appeal? We are like, where do we have 100 crores? I mean, it's say a 8,000 crore demand. I am a company whose revenue was 60 crores last year. Where do I get 100 crores to fight a legal battle? So that's the sort of absurdity that is being perpetrated.
So, what does this do for ease of doing business? This was touted as a reform. This was touted as a tax reform, which would make life easier for businesses. One single tax. Okay, it was not one single tax. Now multiple brackets have been introduced, and now we see these tax notices come in. So the kind of demands that we've seen, we could very well see these companies just completely shut shop. They might as well just file for
Absolutely.
bankruptcy, or just completely shut down and start something completely different, or give up entrepreneurship altogether.
No, correct.
See,
Definitely,
I'll
it
tell you.
severely dent. Sorry,
Sorry, please go ahead.
it severely dents ease of business. And you mentioned bankruptcy, etc. That's already happening in the not on. I mean, online gaming, of course, gets reported. There are other sectors where it is severely discouraging entrepreneurship, which probably is not as glamorous as online gaming, not getting reported as much. Because see, if you are doing, if you're planning any sort of business, and I'll give you an example that is a very personal example. There's a cousin of mine who wanted to start up something. He wanted to do something as basic as import certain items and do trading in India through a e-commerce platform. His goods are stuck in customs for I mean, because the DGFT keeps changing the import policy vis-a-vis those items, and he is getting one approval, then something else comes up, etc. And in front of my eyes, he's like, I probably will make some 5 lakhs out of this, but is it worth it? I mean, the kind of stress levels that I'm handling, how do people do business in India? And that's the poignant question. We have currently a very favorable geopolitical climate. Everyone is talking about India centric supply chains, India centric US. Everyone loves India. But unless we also have to live up to that, we also have to ensure that our policies, our tax infrastructure, everything is
Yeah.
geared to ride that particular wave.
Mhm.
Current I mean, that this enthusiasm for India will die down unless we really correct some of these things.
So India has had a very contentious relationship with tax reforms. We've had the ghost of retrospective taxation haunt us, and that completely spooked investors. And now this. So, Mr. Singh, you wanted to make a point when Mr. Bhattacharjee was talking.
I
Would you
was
like to come in?
I
It was on
was I
ease of
was
doing
only
business. Yeah.
I was only trying to tell you on a lighter side that you said that you can file for bankruptcy if you don't have that sort of money to deposit and file appeals. You are underestimating that also. For bankruptcy also, you have to fight litigation for a couple of years.
So
This is
that's also
one.
not. I just can't go and say, okay, I can't do this, and I just want to shut shop. No.
Bankruptcy again is a litigation and high cost litigation affair. This is one. Second, see, on a serious note, I have few serious suggestions, which are, I mean, it's easier said than done. First is we really need to improve our infrastructure. Like, we can't have 20,000 officers taking care of 1.2 or 1.5 crore GST filings. And imagine it's only 1.5 crores, which is maybe less than 2% of our population. Imagine if 20% of our population starts filing GST, it'll be havoc. It'll be crazy. Nobody can handle that sort of situation. First. And
Hmm.
second, whenever there is a tax statute, whether it be income tax or GST or whatever, generally the provisions are meant, or the policy is meant to say that if you are doing business, we are assuming that you are a chore. Like, you will do
Yeah.
GST fraud, you will evade taxes. So that sort of mindset from the executive or from the legislature needs to change. We should have a mindset that these are business people, these are backbone of the economy of our country, and let's assume on the face of it that they are honest,
So
rather
this
than
was a very
assuming.
socialist mindset. We were plagued with this mindset, but one would have hoped that that's changed, but clearly not.
Absolutely. And the third point is accountability. If you get an absurd notice, what is the accountability of the officer who is issuing it? He gets nothing. All he gets is probably a scolding in a line by the High Court. And honestly, with all due respect to the judicial system and the Honorable High Courts and Supreme Court, he really doesn't care.
Of course, he really doesn't care. His job is secure. So, what is the kind of timeline that we're looking at? These companies, how long will they have to fight this litigation for?
Very long. I would say. Can't predict the timeline. Sorry, I'll be the first one. It's an exciting question to be. Very long. I don't see an end to it. A lot of things have to be changed, as my colleague friend mentioned. There has to be a mindset change. There has to be a proactiveness to improve the executive. I think one point that we did not discuss and is really important is rate rationalization. I think a lot of disputes these days are happening on a variation of different tax rates. You have 18, you have 28, and there's a dispute around it with B12 as well. So I think these aspects are something that the government must work on. Otherwise, things will not really change in the near future as well.
I think I will, Shweta, really emphasize and restate the point that Jasmeet made about accountability. I think unless we are really ensuring accountability, what is the disincentive for bad behavior, right? Something as basic as I can understand a revenue officer taking a stance on an interpretative issue that is pro-revenue, which is a fair point. But you see the number of cases where high courts across the country are deciding or are quashing notices because you have not followed principles of natural justice, which basically means that you have not heard the SSE, you have not taken into cognizance his or her filings, his or her facts, his or her statements. Nothing has been taken into account. It's a unilateral decision. It is not rocket science that if you are taking an adverse decision, you must hear the other side. Like, this is very basic. This is very logical. And we are talking about officers who pass. These are all intelligent, highly educated people. So it is, I don't believe that they are not aware of this basic position of law. But repeatedly one sees, this very basic concept being not dealt with. And what is the consequence? Like Kulraj said, at max, you have a line or a scolding from the High Court judge. But what is the real consequence in terms of their records of service? Is that being dealt with?
If I were to write a false story or an incorrect story, I would get reprimanded for it. I would be blacklisted as a journalist. I could lose my job, and that's probably true for all professionals, right? So, I just concluding remarks. If there's one message that you want to give out through this show, to the Revenue Department, to the Finance Minister, in terms of GST reform, what would it be? Jasmeet.
See, I would say have more clarity. It's okay to be greedy, but don't just add provisions on the retrospective part for the heck of it, because the courts have time and again come heavily on the revenue and on state to not do it. But if you keep doing it, obviously the trust would go.
So, Dipto?
I think one of the points that Jasmeet made earlier, that don't have a mindset change. Don't start off by assuming that everyone's a thief or everyone is out to get you.
Yeah.
So I think that's a major sort of thing. And of course, I'll emphasize the point on accountability. This is something I have spoken to two successive. I've had the chance to talk to CBIC chairman, who sort of acknowledged the problem that is happening, where even CBIC circulars were being flouted left, right, and center across the country. And I kept saying that, unless you have consequences, there has to be a stick when there is a carrot. Unless you have that, absolute power will obviously corrupt absolutely. There is no way. So I think that's one thing that definitely, and I think I think either Kulraj or Jasmeet touched upon the point about targets. So of course I understand government today has to be performance driven, and to that extent there has to be a target. But where is the filter that being applied? Is government tracking a data that, okay, if I have raised 100 notices and 99 has been quashed in appeal, shouldn't there be something that I face?
I think this has to this Kulraj?
No, I think the points have been fairly covered. But just last thing that could really happen is a lot more training and development on these executives. So when the GST got launched, there were drives, initiatives taken by the government to train the officers. everything is just lacking. So officers are reacting on their own whims and fancies. Circulars are not being followed. Repetitive circulars are not being followed. So I think besides creating an accountability, I think the part of educating them on changes, educating them to how the industry reacts has to be something that has to be passed on clearly.
Well, thank you so much, all of you, for this very insightful discussion. Uh, from what we see today, from where we are today, it clearly seems like GST is a reform that has gone awry. And what's needed at this hour is greater sensitization of GST officers, better infrastructure to deal with this complicated tax with its multiple rates and laws and rules which are clearly not clearly spelled out, because it's the ambiguity also that's causing a lot of confusion. We do hope that this issue gets resolved before India, which is right now in a very sweet spot, loses its moment and really drives its entrepreneurs out of their interest and their determination to build in India. Thank you so much for joining us today, and of course we'll keep tracking the story on Money Control. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Shweta.